Welcome into Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. My name is Joel Goldberg. I'm breaking out the Royals jacket today. I've got a lot of Royal stuff. I think everybody knows that, but hopefully we are getting closer to baseball. I feel like we are, but that's not for certain. I do know this. I've never had a Memorial Day weekend off. At least not in about 15 years. So I'm excited to spend time with the family. If they're not sick of me yet, they may be sick of me, but that's the world that we're living in. I hope everyone has a good, safe Memorial Day weekend, and we certainly think about those that have served our country. And the guys over at Casey Cattle Company up in Weston, Missouri, who I believe delivered to my house this morning. I thought I heard a doorbell, but I've been up in my studio all morning and into the afternoon here. But I believe that there is a delivery that came from Casey Cattle Company, which is Wagyu beef, bacon cheeseburger brats, burgers, steaks, the whole works. They deliver to all 50 states. They deliver down here to Kansas City. And they're veteran owned and operated, led by former U.S. Army Ranger Patrick Montgomery. So happy Memorial Day weekend to all of my friends at Casey Cattle Company. And thanks for the delivery. I'm sure it's there. I just have to text my wife. But, we got a show going on here right now. And, of course, my friends at Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. One of the things that I like about the show, I cannot believe this is episode 44, so we're closing in on 50, is just the range of topics in different fields. A lot of fields that I don't know as much about and that I'm learning about, and certainly in these COVID times. And here today, we're going to talk about the field of architecture, and my guests, I'm sure like everyone else, have had to pivot, and then in many ways they were already living in the virtual and the digital world. I pull this up not because I'm a blues fan. I am, so that got me right away. But Generator Studio here in Kansas City, you'll see it right there. Architecture and interior design firm specializing in sports venues, so that's my world. Lifestyle, workplace, nonprofit, and residential projects. That's a little bit of a look, and I like this. We start engines of change, generate dreams, set and score monster goals for our clients and ourselves, and strive to make innovative spaces that can be enjoyed for generations. And of course, we know right now that the world has changed. I am happy to visit with, from Generator Studio, their founder, Mike Kress, along with Peter Broeder. And Peter and I met, a year plus ago. I don't remember what it was. And he has moved on to Generator now. And I'm really excited to visit with you guys. Happy Memorial Day weekend. We're just about there. Mike, let me start with you. How are things going in the world of architecture?
Things are, well, first of all, thanks for having us. We're thrilled to be here, and things are going great. Our industry is very adaptable, and we've been in the digital age for quite some time. So the whole necessity to stay at home didn't stop us. In fact, we just embraced the technology that we've been using for years, and we're ready to go, and we're still rolling.
Yeah, Peter, Let's talk about this. I mean, I've said this, it's one of the, I think it's one of the positives to what's going on right now is this. Nothing is exactly the same as it was before. So the positive to me is that we're all in this boat together in some form or another. Again, there's not a business in the world this hasn't affected. Now, some are set up and positioned to do really well with it. Others are having to figure out how to survive. But how about for you, and Mike touched on it, how much of a pivot was this?
Well, for architecture specifically, you said we're all in this together, and that's absolutely the case as it relates to our clients and us as a studio. And as Mike and I talked about this morning, we're in a business that is accustomed to putting people first, and so we're with our clients as well as our office. We're all adapting, like you say, we're all changing, and so it's really important that we find ways to adapt. And then secondarily to that, we're all finding out new ways to be with one another socially, whether that's digitally. And so I think those are two kind of resounding lessons learned here is adaptability of the human spirit, but then also just the need to be with one another. And that certainly applies to some of our market sectors as it relates to our hospitality and entertainment.
You know, Peter, you said something there that I've been saying every day. It's part of one of my speeches, the virtual speeches, that it's always about people. It was about people before this began. It's about people now, maybe more so than ever, because I think that, you know, people need to be cared for right now. And it'll be about people later. And ultimately, I know that that's the world you guys are in. I mean, you're designing dreams, I think, as you sort of put it on the website there. So, Mike, what are you hearing from your clients? What are you hearing from your prospects that are perhaps reevaluating the way they look at those dreams?
Yeah, I think there's sort of the short-term play and the long-term play. Short-term, I think a lot of our clients are asking questions on how can they continue or restart work in their existing spaces. And that's a fairly easy, any designer worth their weight should be able to say, hey, you need to social distance and your office can now accommodate X number of people, and we can figure out a way to make your space work in its current state. The challenge is, I think their tastes are changing. And Peter and I talked about, in a sense, this is it's very much a disruptor, but in a sense, this is a 100-year event per se. And so things like this, and I hate to equate it to war, but things like war and major changes, certain things tend to get put in the microwave and advance very quickly, and it's usually technology. So I think the longer term play is people are going to start wanting to impart some of the things they frankly enjoyed about working from home into their workspaces, and certainly into their retail and hospitality experiences. Everything from immediate access to outdoors, fresh air, all the things that they have at home that they're being asked to now go back to the office potentially, or enjoy communal spaces that don't necessarily have those amenities. So I think the longer term play is we're going to see a shift in bringing some of the immediacy that the home provides into work and play environments.
And I think that'll be true in the sports world, certainly true in the office. Here's the interesting question that I have, and I don't know if there's an answer to it yet. But, you know, one of the things I've been hearing, I think we probably, if everything goes the way I hope it does, I think we're back in baseball in July. I know that's going to look different. I do know that if we're back, it will be without fans to start. I don't know when they come back. And I just wonder, with stadiums and arenas, will there, do you think, Peter, I know these are big long-term projects. This is not an overnight thing. Nothing you guys do is overnight, but I would think that designing an office may be a little bit of a different, time frame than designing a big stadium or something like that. Does the design of sports venues change based on what some of the needs of this pandemic are? I mean, I agree with Mike. This is probably a 100-year event, but it's now a 100-year event that's happened in our lifetime. Will you guys, do you envision, be designing sports venues differently because of this?
I do think so in some ways. And as Mike touched on, I think this will accelerate some trends that we already saw happening. But as it relates to sporting venues, and it's certainly a question that we've all, particularly in our line of work, have all considered a lot recently. It's a little difficult to say at this point. And there's a lot of folks who say, or who are putting forth solutions as it relates to minimizing the number of fans and seats, or changing concourse layouts to minimize touch points at concessions. It's a little difficult to say at this point in time that we won't be confronting a new challenge in a year's time. And I think the hope many of us are holding out for is that a vaccine is brought online soon, and I think that will be a huge step forward. But Joel, you're absolutely right that it's going to be a phased solution, as with the office place, as with air travel, as with a whole number of sectors. We will not go back to normalcy immediately. It will be phased. Hopefully, it's phased in a way that sustains revenue streams for sports teams. And so that's one change that we're certainly seeing right off the bat is both at the university level as well as at the pro level, clients looking for new ways to achieve alternative revenue streams whereas we're not having fans and seats at the moment. Or, yeah, so.
I want to ask you guys both this question, and Mike, will start with you and then go to Peter, but full well understanding that no one is enjoying that this is all happening. Now, I mean, I think that many of us will come out ahead. Some won't. There's a whole different discussion there about pivots and, adaptability and all that. But, and I'm someone that believes in, even as an out of work baseball guy right now, like make the best of the situation and, go about it the right way. Opportunities will come. But just from your standpoint, for you guys, like, because for me, I'm a creative guy. Now, I couldn't do what you guys do. My creativity shows in terms of content and, interviews and all that type of stuff. So I'm really re-energized by the opportunity to talk to guys like you and different guests every single day that maybe I didn't have before. And maybe re-energize is the wrong word for the question that I'm going to ask you guys, but when you see this all going on, just the creative side of your brains, I assume that part of architecture that I'm guessing you guys got into it because of that love, does that might kind of stimulate things right now of starting to map out and see what that future might look like?
Absolutely. And, it's funny. Good design usually comes out of the toughest rules. And so the rules have shifted and the rules have been static for quite some time. So there's potentially some wonderful things that are going to happen out of this, silver lining wise. I mentioned the fact that I think people are going to demand the ability of their offices to be a little bit more flexible. For so long, Joel, we tried to make these offices these efficient machines where we got more and more people into the space, and it was more of a mathematical model than a human model. I think that this is going to be a real disruptor and force people to reevaluate, hey, if we don't all need to be there, what does the space start to look like? I don't know if you saw or read, but and just a very immediate thing that's taken place here in Kansas City, for your audience, I think they'll find interesting. Power and Light has decided that they're going to shut down a couple of the cross streets and allow the restaurateurs to essentially extend their seating out into the street and thereby overcome some of the limitations they have. And, as a person who just pays attention and loves the hospitality industry, that's a heck of a fun environment to dine in anyway. So some of these are beautiful mistakes that are going to happen. And again, I think that any designer is going to really embrace these new rules, and we're going to see some changes. It's going to be an evolution and phased, of course, but I think this is a great catalyst for some wonderful new solutions.
Peter, you want to piggyback off that?
Sure, absolutely. I think Mike touched on some really exciting opportunities, and I think there's probably two ways we'll see the built environment change as a response to this, two kind of overarching ones, and one will be a very sort of tangible response to minimizing risk to the spread of viruses. And that'll take place in the forms of new materials and air exchange in buildings and like I said, very kind of measured moves. I think secondarily to that, and maybe more uplifting, are the types of changes that Mike just talked about, which is kind of a reprioritizing what is important to us. And that is well-being, that is socializing with one another. And so at the urban scale, like Mike just said, the idea that Power and Light will be sort of opening or thinking about the district a little differently in terms of utilizing some public space for overflow restaurant dining, I think that's terrific. And particularly in urban areas and cities where people have been perhaps cooped up in an apartment, all of a sudden there's this great appreciation for public parks, for streetscapes that have been well manicured. And so I think what's maybe more exciting than even some of the really sort of tangible scientific responses will be the ways in which we respond and like I say, reprioritize what's really important.
Do we see that happening too, Mike, with sports venues in the future? Meaning, some form of, larger, I don't know, open space gathering areas. I mean, we see some of that in the atriums and some of the ways that these places are being built. I mean, I grew up outside of Philadelphia before moving to Chicago. We went to Veterans Stadium. There was nothing pretty about that at all. It was just like your classic cookie cutter Busch Stadium, Riverfront Stadium, Three Rivers Stadium. They all looked the same. You walked in, they had the ramps going up, some concessions, and that was it. It's so much more about the experience nowadays. So do we see different designs? Yes, the safety that Peter mentioned before, but even just in the way people would gather at a sporting event?
For sure. I think that, again, these catalyst moments tend to put things that were being considered, they put them on the forefront, and they tend to occur a lot quicker. I do think there's obviously been a trend where people don't want to be tied to a seat anymore at venues. They want to be able to experience the venue. And so I think this opens up the potential for lack of a better term, just a gate ticket that allows you to experience, and you're not tied to a seat at all. And, you know, the big money's in group sales areas, primarily premium group sales areas. So you could start to see where a land grab might occur, where you could monetize a section of seats or a section of rail and assign it to a group of people where they have freedom to sort of move in and about that space, but they're not actually plugged into an actual plastic 18-inch square. They're able to just enjoy the game in a much more casual way, which works for a lot of sports. You know, when you start thinking about applying that model of, hey, everybody's walking around and enjoying the game, whatever that may be, that works for a lot of sports. Some sports it doesn't work. So that's what's interesting about all this. You know, hockey's a great one. You know, the crowd is asked to sit until the puck stops. And as a hockey fan, you get this, Joel. Once your eye finds that puck, you lose time, and there's very few whistles in the game, and so you're brought in and sucked in, and it's hard to detach yourself from that. So hockey, I think, will be a much different solution than, say, baseball or football even, but it's fun to imagine for sure.
And I might add too, I think that idea of flexibility to create your own experience is not only going to apply to stadiums and arenas, but returning to the office or to really many social spaces, and that we're going to be leaning on people to help to sort of set their own boundaries in terms of what they're comfortable with. And I think you'll see that happen certainly in stadiums and arenas, but in the office space too. I think that'll begin to change the way in which we maybe move away from some of the open office layouts that we've seen really prevalent in the last few years. And there will be options now when you enter the new office space as it relates to, am I going to be working in an open space and collaborating with others, or am I going to be do I need to find a huddle space where I can focus for a few hours? And so I think that type of change is going to happen really across the board.
Yeah, and I know that, and by the way, this is true in just about any profession. I joked with you guys before we came on. My level of knowledge of architecture is pretty much at zero. I think like super interesting. I like looking at the final product of what you guys do, and ultimately that is what you do, so that people like me don't have to figure that out. We don't know how to do that. But you know, my exposure to architecture was Mike Brady walking in with the plans in the little tube, you know, to his home office or whatever it was. Totally different world, 70s and all of that, like anything else. But the digital world that we live in, and the ability to design and share that. Mike, tell me what that process is like. And, you know, I said earlier, it's always about people, the give and take of working with your clients and helping them design that through those images, and how, if at all, that has changed right now. Not in terms of what they want, but just in terms of communication.
Yeah, I think for many years, and it's a little bit of a homage, I guess, to the Mike Brady of the 70s that you mentioned, but certainly the architects in my generation really depended on, at the end of the day, we're solving clients' problems with a solution, one of many potential solutions. So sitting down across the table from them and having a dialogue is immensely important. But since physically sitting across the table from somebody, for the short term at least here, doesn't exist anymore, we rely heavily on our digital modeling to basically immerse a person, or a client, I should say, in a space. So we've relied on that for years because many of our clients simply require that level of sophistication, particularly in our sports work. But it's now going to become, for us at least, the way we're going to have to communicate. So even on a smaller restaurant project here locally in Kansas City, I think about we're involved with renovating the historic Star building, which is a building that is nearly impossible to get your head around from a square footage standpoint. So we're going to rely on that modeling to be able to compartmentalize and say, okay, let's talk about your space and put them in that space digitally. In some ways, this is forcing us to just be better storytellers, because we have to get rid of some of the extraneous things that don't really get back to the heart of the matter. And the computer allows us to basically experience the space as you will when it's built. So it's again, one of these beautiful mistakes, if you will, that's come out of this social distancing. It's a requirement now.
Peter, this gets back to the creativity, but as your mind starts to advance to things that maybe you weren't thinking about before. And by the way, Mike, you talked about how this is kind of, you didn't say forcing the issue, but it's pushing some things ahead that maybe were on the back burner, or people. That's true in everything. And then this is the simplest of examples, but for instance, in baseball terms right now, I believe, and it's been written about a bunch, that we will see a universal DH this year, which makes anyone that likes National League Baseball cringe. However, it's going to be necessary, because we're going to see a lot of National League versus American League. It's going to be very, provided we get this thing going, it's going to be very regionalized, and it's just going to be safer for the Royals to play more games against the Cubs and the Cardinals and all of that to keep it within the Midwest. Same on the West, same on the East, and all that. So the talk is that next year it'll go back to being what it was, but by 2021, expect that the DH will be a full-time thing. They've been trying to inch towards that for a while. They're traditionalists, I understand it, that want it to be the way it was. But this almost kind of paves the way for that happening. And so that's what I think about when you say this is all changing our norms, or what we expect, and it maybe opens some doors. Because you guys know people, well, it's human nature to resist change. Not for everybody, but change is a little bit scary. So this pushes us, towards that a little bit. How much from a creative side, Peter?
Yep.
Are these ideas now that you're coming up with brand new? Were they things that were marinating before? Have there been some aha moments where you're like, wait a minute, this actually makes some sense now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think I would say that some of the trends and some of the emerging trends that we were just beginning to experiment with over the last couple of years that hadn't yet really emerged onto the main stage as it relates to common practice within architecture. I think bringing this event has certainly accelerated that, and so to keep it general in terms of some of the trends we're seeing as it relates to just improved well-being and a really appreciation for what does it mean to whether it's for university students or for individuals in their home to have a more sort of holistic approach to wellness. I think this whole event is going to really force the hand a little bit in terms of accommodating wellness, both in the workplace, accommodating it at home, certainly accommodating it at universities. It's been sort of an emerging trend at universities. So I think now we're going to certainly begin to see access to the outdoors designed into dormitories, designed into recreation centers, spaces on campus where you can pause and gather yourself, and really an attentiveness to the sort of psychological impacts of what the pandemic had brought about. I think it's really, there's certainly sort of an immediacy of the health challenges posed by the pandemic, but I would say the fallout as it relates to just the elevated stress level that many students are dealing with, I think that's going to be as important as, in many regards, as dealing with some of the immediate health concerns.
Can I add something? I think one thing I find fascinating about all this, and Peter and I were talking about it yesterday. Some of the things that are going to be, I speculate, will become much more important in design, are actually old trends that we've stepped away from. So 100 years ago, influenza forced people to understand that they needed to have natural ventilation in buildings. And so over the course of making buildings more efficient and airtight and more just better machines in terms of consumption of energy, we've stepped away from some of those things that were just smart building practices. And so I think some of those basic building practices are going to come back. So yeah, so in a sense, it'll be trailblazing, but we're actually re-walking paths that the architects were doing 100 years ago. But this time, what's interesting about it is, Joel, I don't know if you're familiar with LEED and the whole idea of well building and people seeking to do a better job, architects, builders, to do a better job of our, let's face it, buildings are one of the biggest consumers of energy on the planet. And so there's been motivations for our industry to consume less power and use things like natural ventilation, but these things come with expense. And with this whole drive towards efficiency in the last 50 years, people tend to steer away from those building practices because, frankly, they cost more to do. And this might be the time where we start to attain some of those sustainability initiatives, not the way that it was taught to us or sort of preached to us to get there, but this time out of necessity for health. Because ultimately, you know, in the development game, the almighty dollar wins. But if all of a sudden dollars or I guess our hands are being forced by building codes and otherwise saying, no, you got to naturally ventilate this space, we might start to hit a lot of these goals a heck of a lot sooner than we would have if it weren't for this pandemic.
Yeah, a new norm.
Yeah.
Forced maybe for good reasons. You know, when you were talking about some of that, it got my mind going to a similar thought, maybe in a different way, but I'll ask it this way, and we'll start to wind down here. But when I think about like sort of generations, I'll use a mall as an example. If you drive by any mall, if it happens to still exist, you can kind of tell what generation it was from, right? Like in Kansas City, and I know it's not there anymore. If you were to drive by a Metcalf South, you could tell when it was, you know, when it was from. When we look back 50 years from now, what will, Peter, I'll start with you here. What will people identify when they drive by a building or a mall or a stadium? They'll say, oh, that was built sometime, you know, around 2020. Around that pandemic, what will be identifiable? Like, you know, you can see the 70s look when you go by something, if it's still even in existence. Now, I don't even know if malls as we know them will exist in 20 years.
Well, no, that's a really interesting question, and particularly as you look at metropolitan areas, you're absolutely right. You look at certain buildings from the 70s, and they look very fortress-like, because at that point in time, daylight wasn't necessarily that important, and access to fresh air wasn't important. And so you got these buildings that looked like castles, very monolithic. And progressively over the last couple decades, you've seen the incorporation of much more natural daylight and ventilation into design. And I think this will certainly accelerate that trend. I'm optimistic, as Mike touched on, that this is going to force the hand a little bit as it relates to embracing sustainable design practices. So hopefully this is, we're not turning back in terms of returning to fossil fuel consumption, that will in fact really embrace the incorporation of solar panels and ways to harvest energy from the natural environment. I'm optimistic this will be a really critical turning point.
Yeah, no, it's fun.
It's the new norm.
I think
there he is.
We're co-officing.
Come on in. You can tell him to jump on in, and Peter, you can.
Here we go.
Yeah, if you can hear me still, we'll be okay. You know, I keep talking in my speeches. We'll wrap it up, but I love this. I keep talking in my speeches about, you know, you can't wait for perfection. Just take messy action right now. Nothing is. I shouldn't say nothing is what it once was, but there is a great in the same way that a cat now walks into someone's Zoom call, or, you know, your child comes in and interrupts you, and before, like, you can't do this, and now it's like, okay, fine. You know, I for me, what I thought when the first thing I thought was, boy, Mike's not blinking at all right now. I'm pretty sure he's frozen. That's okay. We also have some storms in the area. That might have a little something to do with it. And then I thought, well, it's a good thing Peter's here, because I don't have to fill any time. He's in the middle of an answer. Yeah. But I also know from my TV world that if I got to fill the time, like if you guys both freeze right now, by the way, I'll say goodbye in advance. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, and everything will be fine, and we'll wrap it up. But I do want to get a final thought from you guys as we do wrap it up, and I appreciate your time, and it's great that now you're both in one box here together. I actually had a question, and I wanted to ask this because I think it's interesting from an entrepreneurial standpoint. It comes from a friend of mine, Jennifer Dehan, who has a staffing company that she co-founded. When was the moment that they and Michael, asked this to you, when you wanted or needed to venture off from a large firm to start your own? What was that aha moment? She's been through that certainly in her business too, and I think it's an interesting one because so many people wonder about taking that step in whatever they do.
Yeah, for me personally, and I'll try to get to the heart of it quickly, but with a little bit of precursor in that I worked for some wonderful architects in Kansas City, and Kansas City is just an incredible place to practice architecture because we have some of the leaders in the country here, both from a sports standpoint and sustainability. So I needed the time underneath other people to just learn the craft. But around the time that I decided to settle roots here and start a family, get married, was when it made sense to me. And the tie for me was, look, I was about to become a bigger footprint because of a wife, children, and start to impact, just meet more people. And I thought, well, you know what, as I'm kind of growing as a human, this is probably the right time to start networking as an architect, as my own architect. And I happened to find another gentleman that was in that same time period. So for me, it was about just realizing sort of my circle of influence was starting to get a little bit bigger. And so thought, if I'm going to put time and effort into this, whatever this is, I wanted to have a greater hand in shaping what it was.
Makes sense. I appreciate Jennifer. She's the co-founder of a company called Velocity. She's awesome. And so I appreciate that. Final question. It's the same for both of you, but the answers I know will be different. It's just a curiosity. It's a fun question that I would ask. Favorite project in your careers, each of your careers that you designed or worked on. And I know that could be, that's like when people ask me, what's your favorite interview or favorite blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you got to narrow it down more, like, favorite interview, favorite celebrity, whatever it is. And by the way, mine in terms of most unique was the late wrestler, Roddy Piper, who happened to be at Wrigley Field, and suddenly all the magic happened. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, Peter, favorite project that you've ever worked on?
Great question. I'll give a two-part answer. And for many people, I've worked on large sports projects. I had the opportunity to work on a Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, which was a phenomenal experience. But the magnitude of that project is a little bit hard to sort of grow an affection for. And so it was actually, for me, a much smaller project earlier in my career I look back on as a favorite project. And it was a renovation of a campus building at the University of Nebraska, actually their satellite agriculture campus, their East Campus. And we renovated their 100-year-old student union as a new recreation center. And it was a really neat project because of the scale and the impact it made on the student community there. And for those reasons, that was a really, for me personally, my favorite project.
Very cool. Mike, how about you?
Well, I'll start off by saying I was more of a Junkyard Dog fan than a Roddy Piper fan. But to each his own, I guess. So to me, I'll give you a local project. So a couple years ago, we did a new tennis facility at Carriage Club. And what was gratifying about it for me was kind of the marriage of hospitality, sports, all the things the very reason that I try to keep our office active in all the different building types was kind of in one central sort of thesis there. All those things came together in that project, and it's local, so I can take my kids there. I love it,
Yeah, that's cool. And I know, again, it's not really a total fair question either, because when you've done so many, there's a lot. But I view that as the same thing, because it's like with me and all the different people that I get to come across and interview, they're all unique, and some better than others and all that kind of stuff. So this has been really interesting, and I think it's so fascinating to get a glimpse into what this world might look like. And we started with the three of us. We end with the three of us. Instead of there being 3 boxes, there are 2 boxes. And guess what? It all worked out well. So, guys, I appreciate you both taking the time and enlightening us a little bit. It excites me just to wonder what this is all gonna look like and start to picture it. I was actually really excited this year to see another stadium open in baseball. It was going to be the Texas Rangers. I don't think I'll get a chance to see that till next year. But having been to every single major league stadium, it's fun to see those differences and see that work, even if I don't know how to put something like that together. So I appreciate all the insight, guys. I'm glad that you're doing well over at Generator Studio. I know that you'll continue to do so here in this community and certainly around the country. So, Mike, Peter, thanks for spending the time. Have a great Memorial Day weekend and continued success.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate
To
it.
you.
Thank you.
All right, take care, guys.
Great.
A lot of fun, interesting discussion there from my guests, Mike Kress and Peter Broeder. Once again, I want to thank my friends, the veterans that are running Casey Cattle Company, and a thanks to them for their service always, and especially here on this Memorial Day weekend. I know that Patrick Montgomery, as so many veterans, suffered loss during their time of some of their colleagues, some of their contemporaries, and I know in Pat's case, his brother-in-law too. So we're thinking about all of those that so honorably served our country and sacrificed their lives. Check out Casey Cattle Company, Wagyu beef, veteran owned and operated up in Weston, Missouri. And I hope my friends at Enterprise Bank and Trust will enjoy a good bank holiday weekend, get a little bit of time off. Hashtag no stopping you. Thank you to all of you for watching. Thanks to all of those that serve our country, have sacrificed, and continue to protect our freedoms. Going to take Monday off, and then we're back with episode 45 on Tuesday. Full slate already next Tuesday through Friday. Happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody. Thanks for watching Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust.